Welcome back to Reformed Millennials, the podcast where finances, economic trends, and sports intersect. Cam and Joel help listeners better invest their time and money. Also, it's important for listeners to understand that investing in equities, fixed income instruments, and/or alternative asset classes involves substantial risk of loss. Any action you may take as a result of the information presented in this podcast is your own responsibility. The information in this podcast is presented as a general educational, informational, and entertainment resource only. While Joel is registered to provide investment advice, this podcast does not provide individualized investment, tax, or insurance advice, nor is it meant as a recommendation to any listener to buy or sell any specific securities or otherwise take any other form of investment action. This is an excerpt of the full legal disclaimer that's available on the landing page of this podcast, which includes whether Cam Pitchers or Joel Shackleton have any ownership or interest in the specific securities discussed in this podcast.
5, 4, 3.
Morning, happy Thursday.
3 Thursdays in a row. We did it.
Consistency is key to a moderately successful podcast. Cam, I want to read you a couple headlines from BNN Bloomberg this morning. Obviously, as you know, we had a rate hike in Canada yesterday.
As expected.
Yeah.
So.
Duh.
As predicted on this podcast last week, we were the only ones to foresee this. No economists out there other than us.
Yeah, we got it a week early. Royal LePage says average home price down year over year in second quarter. Bank of Canada rate hike. Inflation will linger for longer, Bank of Canada says. Bank of Canada rate hike could put more pressure on landlords, expert says. Average asking price for Canadian rental unit hits record high in June.
The consistent word there, record.
Yeah. One more.
Please click.
What mortgage owners need to know about the Bank of Canada's rate hike? Very interesting. I'm sure that's full of very important information. So instead of reading all 5 of those like I had to, I'm going to give you a couple of my opinions that are not financial advice. So I've had 9 conversations with clients, friends, whatever, this past week, who are, I think, rightfully concerned about a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And it feels eerily similar to what it was like in 2021 or 2020 when everyone was kind of freaking out about an unknown virus. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of conversations with people back then where they were concerned about, oh my God, what the market's down 40%. Right now, their interest payments are up 400%.
You know, say the portfolio is probably doing fine.
Yeah, but the interest they're paying on their house, which is generally the largest asset of a lot of these people, is not, and it's concerning. I mean, for some that have a $350,000 mortgage, the interest they're paying on a monthly basis is like $1,600, $1,500. That's a lot of money for a lot of people. That's a big piece of their wallet share, and unfortunately, that's coming from principal pay down, right? And it's hard to stomach, especially relative to what we've been used to. Since 2010, we've had rates sub 4%. Mm-hmm. Basically, our entire adult life, we've been below 4 for a mortgage. I've never owned a mortgage in the 3s. And for myself, who's now buying a house that's going to have a mortgage in the high 5s, it's hard to stomach. And I'm having to have this conversation where I talk a little bit more about how to think about your mortgage and use anecdotes from the early 2000s, late 90s, 1980s to help people understand where we're at, where we're going, and maybe even to think about their mortgage payout for not just 5 years, the next 5 years, but over the next 10, 15. So this is what my thoughts are. Again, not financial advice. Right now, the Bank of Canada's at 5%. Prime rate 7.2. Most variable mortgages are like, if you're have a nice credit rating, have a good job, you're getting prime minus 1.1. I've seen a few people a little higher than that, maybe a little lower than that, depending on how good your banker is. But that's kind of where everybody's floating. Mm-hmm. So what happens next? I think it's really important to think about the Bank of Canada and the federal, or the Fed, and what their mandate is. It's the same on both sides of the border. It's price stability and full employment. So I'm going to kind of give people, I'm going to go back to what I was talking about, I think just 10, 15 months ago. But price stability is about you going to the grocery store and being able to see the same prices for the goods in which you're purchasing month after month after month, with a very small 0.2, 0.3% increase on a month-over-month basis. For $100, it adds 30 cents every month. Like, that's something that's you can handle, right? Now, what has been the greatest impact on price stability or the inflation coming down? Well, energy prices have remained or have gone down quite a bit. We've seen the price or the increasing price of food and natural gas for its impacts or inputs on agriculture. All of those things have made it so that inflation has kind of come back down to this high threes rate. Mm-hmm. But the next thing to consider is full employment. And this is where I think the rubber hits the road and where we're at today. Full employment right now, at least in the Bank of Canada's eyes, is a equilibrium between employee and employer. And for the last 2.5 years, I think that employees have had the power.
For sure.
While unemployment spiked when they were forcing businesses to close, since then, employees have had the ability to find a new employer with ease. They could go from working at X to Y and demand a 15% pay increase and a beneficial work from home schedule. Mm-hmm. That, in my opinion, is not normal. And what the Bank of Canada wants to see is, right now we're 4% unemployment. And when you think about the United States, they often are high threes, mid threes. That's full employment to them. But you can really see the strength of that employment rate when the employee is able to swing employers really quickly and demand an increase. And we need to see a reduction in wage inflation, and we need to see an increase in unemployment. And this sounds terrible. For our Bank of Canada to want to put weakness into the hands of the regular working class person, it comes across as crass and terrible, but that's truly what they're going for here. And it's mostly so that they can, or at least in their opinion, and all the education that they have, they believe that this is better for the overall economy, and it's better for Canada, it's better for America. It maintains our standard of living across the country as being stable, strong, and something that you can continue to grow and improve on. So where are we right now? I think it's pretty fair to say that we found a modicum of price stability. Steak is still outrageously expensive, but at least it's not getting more so. When you go to a restaurant, I haven't seen Joey's increase the prices anytime or recently. They did lots of that last year. You go to the pump, well, with the exception of our taxes that we keep adding to our energy prices, yep. The actual price of a barrel of oil is now sub 60 or sub 70, Brent anyways. And that is, I don't know, $55 less than it was last year at this time. So we're seeing prices come down and stabilize. We're starting to see, just things become more stable. Mm-hmm. And that, along with housing prices, with the exception of the cost of housing, has started to stay the same. We have, in that list of headlines I was reading, they talked about how housing prices, especially in our major city centers, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, housing prices are down quite significantly. I know in Edmonton, I think year over year, prices are down 10%. Mm-hmm. Quarter over quarter, 3%. I think Calgary is the only one growing. So that's what they were trying to accomplish here. That's when they were raising rates 500 basis points or 5% in 15 months. That's what they were going for. And they've accomplished it, in my opinion. I actually think that and this seems to be the sentiment on Twitter, they've accomplished their goal and they've won. And they're almost at that soft landing they were looking for. So now I kind of want to put forth a prediction that is not financial advice. So in order for us to get what I believe the millennial, the person listening to this podcast, wants, is rates back to high threes, mm-hmm. low fours, we need to see employment fall. And I think, or unemployment increase. And it's probably on its way. I believe October, November, you're going to finally start to see that crack. Mm-hmm. You can see it already with the back to work data. DataTrek has a phenomenal tracker on this. It basically says they can track the the amount of time spent in office for employees, and it's gone from being like in the high 30s a couple of years ago to being well above 50% on its way to 60%. And that is their indicator for whether or not the employee or the employer has power. So demanding those back to office, which seems to be the Gen Z boomer generation, that's what they're wanting out of their employees, the management class. They're asking for their employees to come back to work. They're now able to flex that, because those that were over the last 2 years, they basically said, no, I'm going to quit and go somewhere where I can work remote, right? Well, that power dynamic's shifting. I think we're coming more to that equilibrium. Once we hit above 60, 65% of the time, well, I think that'll be an interesting spot in this market. So in my mind, fixed rates predetermine, or they are predictive of where the Bank of Canada is going. The banks are trying to find a spot where they can find where consumers are willing to spend or buy, or they can put on more, they can sell more product, that product being mortgages, and a rate in which they can make money, right? So the fixed term is often predictive. It's usually 9 months ahead of the Bank of Canada's rate increase or rate decrease. In my mind, that's likely going to start first quarter next year. I think the Bank of Canada is going to start cutting. I believe we're likely at peak fixed rates on a 3 and 5 year term. That's just a guess, but that's what I feel like is happening. For me, I believe it's peak tightness. And for those buying a house right now, like myself, you're a sucker. However, I also have, and I don't know if people listen to this for my real estate takes, because I'm by no means an expert in real estate, especially private residential stuff. But it's always been my opinion to buy when it's most painful. If it really hurts and it's really hard to do, it's probably the right thing to do. Go the road less traveled, do the things that people are less like or not wanting to do, and you're probably making a good investment. When I think about how hard it was to buy Facebook stock last year when it was $86 a share, and everyone hated Mark Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk was the king, and all they wanted was for Meta to die, and that the metaverse was never going to exist. You fast forward a year later, and the metaverse is cool again. Goggles are neat. There's a thing called Threads. Twitter's going to zero, and Mark Zuckerberg is hanging out with the two weight class champions of the UFC, surfing on his wake setter and hanging out on his island,
flying them out to Lake Tahoe for training.
And I'm listening to a Pivot podcast where Kara Swisher, who literally despises Mark Zuckerberg, is pumping his tires talking about how awesome he is just a year later. Scott Galloway, who thinks he's the worst person on earth, has changed his tune. He thinks that the stock is cheap. Just, I don't know, 250% later. It's unbelievable to watch the sentiment change. And when things are darkest, it's likely a great time to start to shop. So
darkest before the dawn,
as they say. Yeah. That's kind of my Canadian market update. Obviously, interest rates are the hottest topic right now. I'm by no means Nostradamus here. I think I've been a little early on rates on when it's stopping. I've been wrong probably by about 50 basis points. But at the same time, it really feels like the soft landing has almost been. When you're a tower operator at an airport, I feel like the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve have accomplished. They've landed their plane.
Their air traffic controller.
Yeah, exactly. I think they've done a good job.
I think, I think generally just based off of what I'm looking at from like third-party sources, which I'm sure obviously you're using that to base your opinion on as well, but there is, I would say, general sentiment that would say between Q1 and Q2 of 24 that is when the expected cut would be, or the first cuts would be. I think they want to sustain this level of, call it pain, or this level of interest rate for the next 6 months, I would think, because like as you said, if there's been indications of stabilization in certain parts of our economy, and now you're getting to the stage where you're like, okay, well, we're going to do this, which again, this 0.25 hike from yesterday was was well anticipated and was essentially priced in, I guess you could call it, based off of the commentary we had last week and just from what I think anyone would have been reading, following along on Twitter, or just general financial information that was being shared out there. So I think it's going to be a very important next 6 months for sure, because I think they could obviously extend the length of time in which the interest rates stay this high, but I think there's probably going to be a couple dominoes to fall. And I think one thing I wanted to maybe continue the discussion on that you had mentioned is just in terms of employment and where we're at with, I guess, that seesaw battle between employee and employer. And I think one of the hottest topics that I read about this week from various sources was Canada's lack of productivity from workers. And I'm not sure if you've seen any reports on this. I think I was reading one with TD, for example, and I'm just going to read a quote quickly from this report that was released. I think it was yesterday from Mark, I'm going to butcher his last name, Urcalo. And so it's called Mind the Gap, Canada's Falling Behind the Standard of Living Curve. And there was his kind of concluding point on here is he said it's becoming increasingly difficult to ignore Canada's widening real GDP per capita gap versus other major economies. The issue has largely flown under the radar as the Canadian economy seemingly masked ongoing productivity issues with what appears to be unsustainable growth via adding more workers. The crux of the problem remains the same, a sagging performance in labor productivity. And so I think a lot of that, I kind of tie that sentiment from one person and to what you were talking about in terms of who holds the power in the relationship. And so obviously there's a lot of really great employees out there and people who are becoming more productive and are doing a great job for their companies, for their employers. But at the same time, when you hold the power and when there's a lot of, I guess I don't want to say concessions made per se, but when that balance of power is not very balanced, then you're able to do less and get the same, I guess you could call it. And I think this is, we've spoken about in the previous podcasts about the plan for Canada to really increase its, I guess, economic output through immigration. And we're a big proponent of that, but that needs to be stabilized through productivity growth as well. At the same time, that can't just be 100% based off of just adding more workers. And to your point, there's going to be cuts on we're foreseeing that there's going to be cuts from the employment perspective as well going forward. So are you going to swing the other way where we're going from too low unemployment to too high unemployment in a very short time period if we're continuing to add workers without increasing economic output, increasing more work being completed, more jobs being out there for these people to go find, houses to have for them to live in, etc. So obviously all these things are tied. I think to your point, I think the next 6 months are going to be very interesting to see what is happening on the employment side of things, because I think a lot of companies are beginning to identify the fact that they are working harder for less. And one of the easiest things to cut once you find a way to replace it is your workers, right? So, that was the only thing I wanted to add to that discussion and say, I think, again, we're probably at the precipice now of potentially stopping the discussion around more hikes, and now what's going to happen with companies narrowing in on their other issues, call it, like their bottom line. And this might be something where it's like, well, we're not getting the performance that we need, so we need to take a hard look on keeping our most efficient staff and changing roles and whatnot.
No, I think that was a really good point to add. And I think, it's important to understand the GDP is a simple equation. It's efficiency times the amount of people in your population, effectively. Mm-hmm. It's the efficiency of your population number. And we're very lucky to have one of those multipliers be a ever-increasing number, especially as Albertans, where we see a lot of population growth and a lot of immigration. And Canada, just in general, being a place that people are desiring to come to. Mm-hmm. I do think it speaks fairly loudly towards, I think, a two-pronged problem in our country, which is a real estate dominant GDP. We're dependent on the fact that a lot of our wealth comes from our home price and it always going up. And then second thing, I mean, is this a tax rate problem? I don't know. We still need to become more and more competitive, right? And I don't want to fall into the trap of what has been Europe. It is a deep, dark hole that they've dug themselves into. They have great immigration in Germany, yet their productivity is falling off a cliff. The demographics are poor in that country. You start to look at every other country with the exception of France, and you have tax rates above 50%. You have, relatively free healthcare and a beautiful country with a high standard of living, but the standard of living isn't growing. And you get political uncertainty when you have a standard of living that isn't ever increasing.
Yeah.
And I think that you're starting to see that obviously in Europe. And again, I don't purport to have any expertise on their political situation, but the same thing's happening in China. And this is why they're so terrified of going into any sort of recession, because when you do, and you lose that momentum from your standard of living increasing, you start to see major unrest in your country. And I feel like the Canadian political environment has cooled it a little bit. I'm hoping that we can solve this GDP problem, as I believe it is an issue. We need to be the place where people want to come to work. How we do it is going to be, I don't know, maybe we just need to change. I'm not sure. But no, really good point. And
yeah, I think, we don't need to dive into the geopolitical side of everything here, or the social side per se, but I think there needs to be, with your immigration policy, I think there needs to be a balance of power between employers and employees for a successful economy. There needs to be a balanced approach to immigration as well. Yeah. And I think obviously that, I think we still need, not to give anybody breaks or anything like that, but we are coming through a 3-year point in our lifetime that is going to be where we're going to talk about these last 3 years, these last 2 years or whatever, when we're 80, talking about, remember this time, right? I think it'd be a very pivotal point in a lot of our generation's lives in terms of where our economies are going and how policy is shaped, et cetera. So I think we are learning about new things on the fly, but there is, I don't know, the productivity piece out of this was just an interesting piece. And I think, again, to your, I guess, earlier comment, when you do have this kind of imbalance in power sometimes with that relationship, employer versus employee, it's harder to maintain that productivity growth because not the same kind of incentive is there, I guess, at the end of the day. And we all know what you and I think about incentives. So,
yes, sir.
So we talked about GDP. I don't want to steal your thunder here, but GDP made me think of a tweet that I read in regards to one of our topics we wanted to discuss today. So we're going to talk about the Sphere in Las Vegas. And so if anyone who was following sports Twitter or just general following along, I think this has been a pretty big news item now that it's kind of opened and almost operational, is how much it costs to build this thing. So I think it was $2.5 billion. So it had, I'm looking at like old stats here, like maybe from like 2020 or something like that, but it would rank within the top 160 of GDP in the world, the cost of that that sphere and what it took to build. So I was just people were comparing it to the GDP of these small islands around the Caribbean and whatnot. So I was getting a chuckle out of that. But there was, I think everyone's seen the viral videos, I guess, of how, like, what this entertainment complex is, and the potential advertising play around how it's been built and whatnot. So everyone's seen like the basketball or the earth or the moon. It's been lit up like that just on the side of Las Vegas Boulevard. You pull up and you're just sitting right outside this crazy display. But I think there's a kind of an interesting story behind it that you wanted to kind of get into as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through a Kash Gupta's Twitter thread here. So the new Sphere has 580,000 square feet of fully programmable LED lighting. For those who don't know, James Dolan, who I think is a polarizing figure in sport.
In sport, for sure. Yep.
Yeah. The mastermind or the brain. This is his idea. James Dolan owns the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers. For those who don't know, he inherited it from his father, who was a self-made man, and he founded Cablevision and HBO. Pretty important, impressive man. And I mean, the thing that I think most people attach James Dolan to is his terrible record as an owner of sports franchises, and more specifically the Knicks than the Rangers. The Rangers have had a modicum of success in the past 30 years.
Yeah, and he's more hands-on with the Knicks, which makes it that much worse. Like, I think he's kind of delegated the Rangers a bit because maybe he's not as much of a hockey fan. But I think if you're gonna, New York's such a mecca of sport at the end of the day, but I think the Knicks are pretty synonymous. Like, I would say Knicks and Yankees would be like 1-2 in terms of like, these are our sports franchises.
100%.
And so he gets a hard knock with ex-players, fans. There's been calls for him to sell the team for a long time.
Can't get a superstar to sign there.
It's been a tough slug in terms of his sport. His legacy in sport right now is not a great one, but
it's taken a turn.
That has nothing to do with his ability outside.
So Dolan sold Cablevision to Atlas in 2015. Amazing time, by the way, to sell. I think his track record in business is not to be, you know what, often people poo-poo people that have inherited wealth from their parents, Donald Trump being one of them. I mean, I often compare it to what has your performance been versus the S&P 500. Not a bad way to look at it.
Yep.
And Donald Trump has drastically underperformed based on his $600 million his daddy gave him in the 80s. He's the only man to not make money in New York real estate during the last 35 years. However, James Dolan has kind of taken the reins, owned two phenomenal franchises in terms of the value growing.
Yeah, my goodness.
But then also converted it into some crazy good real estate plays and actually been on the leading edge. I've been to MSG. The inside of it is unbelievable. So he owns MSG, Madison Square Garden in New York City, and he's kind of rigged it up. It's when you go inside, it's like a museum. It's incredible. The top of it, full of lights. This picture that I'm looking at right now you can write messages on the top of MSG. That's just the things that he's doing is a little bit forward. He's on the leading edge for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Dolan has kind of set his sights on Vegas. He believes that's the future of entertainment. I don't know if he got this idea because of where the NHL has been sort of first there, but he's made a really interesting play here. Vegas itself is booming. It's a great tax rate state. He's made a bet, and I believe it's starting to pay off. These attractions, these sports locations is something that he's focusing on a go-forward basis. He's done a great transition from his father's legacy business, sold them, wrapped them up, gotten rid of them at what I would deem to be darn near the high, transitioned into sport at what I would say was close to the reacceleration of that S-curve. Think about sporting franchises in 2015, price-wise. They were high, but then they didn't really get stupid until Steve Ballmer came in and bought the Clippers.
Yeah.
And then they've just gone nuclear. And people are buying NFL teams for $7-8 billion. When Ballmer paid $2 billion for the Clippers, or a little over $2 billion, people were like, how? What is this? It doesn't make money. How are they doing this? And now they've become art pieces. And he's really started to run with that ball. And this new sphere that he's building is, in my opinion, kind of our modern day version of the churches they used to build.
Yeah, it's like an amphitheater, right?
100%, man.
Yeah.
They used to build these in Europe, and we're still going to visit them today, where we're looking at the architecture and being like, how did they do this? I mean, it used to take 200 years, not a decade, to build.
Yeah.
And perhaps LED screens aren't going to have the same staying power as marble and stone, but
yeah.
There's no way.
I'm sure there's people who throw us at it all the time.
There's no way that this isn't one of the most talked about buildings on the planet right now. And in my opinion, can you beat the advertising value of this? If I go back to Vegas, which is very unlikely, the only reason why I'm going is because, one, I probably want to go to a sporting event there, or two, I want to go to a show here. Now, the only drawback is that I understand the first residency at the Sphere is going to be U2.
I don't know if it's a residency. I think they're doing the
Steve
first
Jobs
show. Yeah, he's going to be dancing. Hologram. I think... I know what you're saying. I think he's actually only doing this. I didn't know about residency. I just heard about doing the first like real show there was going to be U2. But I actually was going to talk about U2 because I was watching a video clip about them walking through during construction. And just to your comment about, I guess maybe the future of entertainment, and this would just be a little small niche part of it, but they were talking about how when we go on tour, any big show goes on tour, you're going to where? Arenas, basketball stadiums, hockey rinks, whatever it might be. They're not built for, the acoustics are not built to house a rock show. Like, they have to do a lot of work to make it what they want it to be, to sound good and to sound how they want it to sound. And obviously the whole idea of a dome, obviously I think everyone can obviously put two and two together here. You're talking about like encapsulating the sound all within one space. I think all the seating in there is like it's basically at almost like a 90-degree angle at parts, but the idea around it I think is really cool, and the fact that it's going to be multi-use. Like, I mean, so I off the top talked about everyone's seen the viral clip of it being a basketball because NBA had their summer league in Vegas, not obviously at the Sphere, but in Vegas, and I think they have future plans to do some of their events
at Tao nightclub, or was it?
Pardon me?
I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
I think Wemby went to Tao too many times.
So they were part of kind of they actually kind of jumped onto the hype train a little bit with this due to that kind of viral clip and them obviously hosting this summer league event there. And I just think from hearing from, again, Bono in this interview or whatever, but the general sentiment around building these, call it, new version of amphitheater, these kind of meccas of entertainment. I mean, what a cool idea. And I mean, what a better spot to open the first one like this anyways in Vegas. Because as you point out, it is kind of had this resurgence. It's always been built off of being an entertainment city, being a destination city for, there obviously we all know people who love Vegas and are going multiple times a year, either just because of the weather and or the casinos and or the golf or whatever it might be. They've now kind of hit this wave of the sports entertainment side of things as well. Obviously, we're going to plug hockey and say like NHL is always going to actually have I guess WNBA I guess was the first pro team there technically. Right. Is my understanding, but then NHL and now obviously NFL has followed, and MLB, Oakland's moving there, and there's a lot of talk that as soon as LeBron James calls it quits, that he's going to be part of a conglomerate that
builds their first team there.
Yeah, first team in the NBA. So they're going to have all four major North American sports franchises in Vegas within the next decade, I would say. And now Vegas has this built-in amazing destination for everything. Like, think of all the packages that they're already probably currently selling for. I'm sure if we went on whatever for, visit Vegas for the Las Vegas Raiders, you're staying here, you got this package, you got this nightclub thing, you go to the Sphere and watch a club, here's your all-in package, boom. They've jumped on this resurgence, and this is just, I guess, to your point about kind of Dolan maybe looking into the future. I think he cut the ribbon on this, I believe, on this development back in 2017. Sounds pretty smart to me. I mean, obviously you can't, I'm not sure if we would have seen exactly what 2023 would have looked like, but to get onto the train of how people are spending their money in relation to entertainment and where they will be going, seems like a good bet.
Couldn't have been easy to hold on through 21, 22. To have that sort of conviction is difficult. I mean, if you've listened to this podcast for 3 years, you know that it's been a roller coaster of I don't know, sentiment towards, I mean, I still don't think I'm ever going on a cruise. However,
They're back, baby.
They're back, baby. As of last, what was it, two episodes ago, where we talked about the share price of all those.
Yeah,
it's, you know what, good for him. He's clearly a visionary when it comes to sports entertainment. Good for him. I don't wish the best on the Knicks. I don't care. Yeah. Do I care about the Rangers? No, I don't like them either. But I'm excited for sports. I'm excited for Vegas. I'm excited for the future of sports entertainment. I think it's really neat. But what I do want to talk about, Cam, is the sport near and dear to my heart, Live Golf, has very recently come out with some new predictions, or I think they're
through
proposals
the Senate,
from Live.
I say through the Senate hearings, I'm sure maybe people had or had not heard, but there had been multiple Senate hearings this past week, I believe, or earlier this week, with kind of all the big hitters with PGA and Live, and there's been obviously a leak of a bunch of information that's came out of the kind of key proposals that were the draft documents. Like, I think when we first talked about this merger talk, when it was first released, everything was still on a draft basis at that time. So nothing has been finalized in relation to this merger, but there has been a bunch of information that has popped out from the Senate hearings to say, well, how did you... Number one, I think obviously they're following the money, but in terms of our entertainment over how it's going to look for the golf scene going forward, there was a lot of other interesting tidbits that came out of that.
Yeah, it sounds like there was 5 proposals, and
these are key ones with
key proposals, and I actually thought you had a hilarious.
I told Joel, I think I'm not sure if it's from a Donald Trump book, actually. I think it is, and maybe it's from The Art of the Deal.
Or is it Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
I don't think it's that. I think I want to say, to give Donnie Boy his props, I think I'm taking this from it, which he probably stole.
He has a ghostwriter.
I think it might be an old saying in general, but when you are proposing something, if you really want one specific thing or 2 specific things, you should group that with 3 or 4 other things that are completely ridiculous, but say that they're all mandatory off the top. And then when you're giving concessions in negotiation, you really don't care about those 3 or 4 other things, because the 2 things that are more reasonable in comparison, that's what you really want, and that's what you're going to get. Which I don't think that's necessarily, that isn't a new thought, but there is. The key proposals that this is, so from Nuclear Golf, I'm not sure, so NUCLR Golf, some pseudonym obviously for a guy. You should, great follow if you're interested in golf. He's been throwing out pretty sick information all week. That's what we've been pulling a lot of our tidbits from. So this presentation titled Best of Both Worlds was given to heads of the PGA Tour. Here are the key proposals. So Tiger and Rory would each own a Live team. Tiger and Rory would play in 10 Live events. Yasir El-Rumayyan, that's the head guy here of the PIF that we had talked about previously on podcasts. He would be granted an RNA and Augusta National membership. 2 elevated events to be branded under Aramco and our PIF flags, with one of those events being held in Saudi Arabia. And then the Live PGA LPGA Superstar Global Team event with 16 team captains, live draft on TV, et cetera, et cetera. So out of those 5 things, I just know what my opinion would be is that I want that Augusta membership more than anything. So if that's the least ridiculous, if you know 100%, there's no way Tiger or Rory are ever going to agree to do this based off their original stances, which Joel notified me as of this morning, because they're all
This is a quote from Rory McIlroy this morning. If Live Golf was the last place to play golf on earth, I would retire.
There you go.
That's how I feel about it.
So that key proposal getting scrapped. If them playing in 10 Live events getting scrapped. The elevated events, obviously, being overseas, they're already doing that they've been doing that quasi over the years prior to Live being around. They were starting to move into doing some events over in Asia in general, in the Middle East. So that's probably a go. But that membership, that old Augusta membership for...
Yeah, this guy's getting that for sure.
He's definitely getting that. That's a non-negotiable. So I props to putting that in there, that needs to be included in the merger talks, is that he gets a membership at these places. So outside of that, though, I think the Senate hearing stuff obviously came largely off the backs of the fact that there is a North American or American-based membership, I guess, doing business with Saudi Arabia, and obviously the backlash that we have talked about on the kind of geopolitical, social side of this since day one of LIV being announced is now at the highest level of the U.S. government and being discussed and saying, well, how and why are you doing this, etc. And it comes back. I mean, I think I can't remember who was talking about it in the Senate hearings specifically and speaking to this, but essentially that it's kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face from the PGA's perspective. So I think in a perfect world, do they want to be in business with, like, all things being equal? Would they want to be in business with another rival league that's especially from an area of the world with controversy around it? No, they do not. But this was not, if you look forward, you talked about this probably from day one. If you look forward 10 years, where are you going to be? These guys aren't going anywhere.
They have way too much money.
So you're going to potentially, and then neither here nor there in terms of the rhetoric that came out of this, in terms of talking about, obviously there's a lot of people involved in the PGA that are very rich men and women and have been benefiting off of the success of that membership over a long time. But they also talked about, well, we have so many investments in our corporate sponsorships and our charity and the way that we give back. And is that going to be all? Are we going to ruin that for North America or for America by going head to head with this rival league and potentially be a nothing burger in 10 years, and you've lost all of this hard work you've done over the last 50? Whereas, do you make concessions and work with this and give up, obviously have a negotiation over what it's going to look like on a go-forward basis, and be able to continue to control what your North American footprint is in the relation to the game of golf and to your, corporate sponsorship relationships and your charity work that you're also doing? So obviously we talked about how Jay Monahan, the commissioner of the PGA, has been under fire for sure from his membership and from the general public with his kind of heel turn on his perspective on things. And he's going to be taking all the bullets here while also, I'm sure, profiting quite a bit and making a bunch of money in the long term. But I think at the end of the day, I think people can respect that sentiment that if you're talking about either, I guess it's one of those, like, do you want to give up concessions? Do you want to live on your knees, or do you want to die on your back, kind of thing? And it's whether or not, and I'm not sure if living on your knees is a great analogy there, but there is going to be some concessions given here, and this was not something that they could have hedged against on a go forward basis, going head to head with something that is obviously been moderately successful in terms of taking talent and taking your product away from you.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, they don't even care if anyone shows up to these live events. So it doesn't matter. They have unlimited runway to make the PGA Tour weak, to continue to expose their weakest link, which is a duration mismatch. This happens in real estate, and it also happens in business. When you have athletes that can only make money for 5 to 10 years, and you have a business that lives forever, you have a duration mismatch. They can come in, pay them $100 million. They don't care if they lose $100 million. All they want is for you to be penetrated to the point in which you have to come to them or come to the table. This is why oftentimes we have anti-competitive laws. This is why we have government that comes in to protect the little guy. But in this case, the PGA Tour felt like they were the 800-pound gorilla in this room. And they didn't think outside the box. That box being actual size.
Yeah.
Not importance in your sector or industry. Actual size. If Jeff Bezos comes into the room and doesn't own any real estate, or let's say it's some random industry, and he decides, hey, bud, I'm probably going to come and do this. Just because you're there and own 90% of the market or 75% of the market, this man is, relative to your market, 10 times your size.
Yep.
And in this case, it was actually 100 times your size. So as much as I think PGA PGA does need to protect its very clean, strong brand. And obviously it's a little bit, it's hurting right now. It's going to be really important to maintain that aura of importance. It's still truly like a really, it's in airified land, in my opinion. It's like, it's still above all else. And they have to clean it. You have to keep it like that in order for it to be a brand that even the PIF wants to be a part of, right? They got to maintain that aura of scarcity, of importance for people to desire to be there. So to water down the PGA Tour would be a mistake, not just for the PGA Tour, but also PIF and their investment in this. If they're going to own a majority, they still need to maintain that the PGA Tour is the place to be, right? And their relationships with majors is very important. So investing in the PGA Tour is just as bad. And I hope the PGA Tour recognizes that, hey, guys, I know you won. You've accomplished this reverse merger. You now bought us. We said we were never going to sell to you. Good job.
Yep.
But do you want us to self-implode? I mean, you think about, I always reference Suits because I watch it too often, but the one time where Scotty actually had put Harvey behind the 8 ball was when his client was like the small, up-and-coming, great real estate hotel investor. And he was growing quickly, and then Scotty was representing this large real estate or hotel entrepreneur, and he wanted to acquire or reverse merger and buy the smaller entity who Harvey was representing. And Scotty kind of pulled over the wool over Harvey's eyes and his client's eyes. But in order to stop this merger, the smaller hotel guy sold off his crown jewels, so that it was no longer attractive to acquire. Well, they're well beyond that. They've already said you're in, you can buy it. We're saying yes to all that. So the PIF and the person buying in Saudi Arabia, they need to maintain the crown jewels.
Yes.
Which is just, it's the best.
It's not the live event in London.
No, it is not. It's not beers being thrown on the tee box. As much as there is that inside of the PGA Tour, it's truthfully the 4 majors. It's the fact that it's the best versus the best. It's 4-day events, and they need to maintain that while also improving it.
And getting all the best to be willing to participate. And
100%.
I think the other thing that you can look at here too is from the PGA's perspective or their controls perspective, it's like, well, here we can use this as a launching pad. We were already thinking that we were on the up and up with, new ideas and ways to grow the game. This could be a launching pad to reaching obviously more of a global, we talked about kind of the F1 model in terms of that idea being spun around in terms of moving golf more globally and having it followed more globally instead of having this kind of fracturing of the game throughout the world. And then who knows, like we're sitting here, if you would have asked us this question in 2013, what we thought the PGA was going to look like in 23, we would definitely not have said what it is. And then if you want to ask us again, what's going to look like in 2033 or 2043, to your point, this is not just about the players and here and now. It's about what is this going to look like in perpetuity for forever for the PGA. And who knows what PIF's role is going to be in any of this on a go-forward basis. Right now, it probably represents a opportunity to grow something to a point where it would have taken them double, triple as long. So make your bed with this and have to probably, again, make some concessions and potentially face some backlash is I think that's what they're thinking. Not necessarily what I think, but what they're thinking and what they're going to be able to do with that on a long-term basis. Who knows? And I think they're kind of jumping onto I think they could trampoline themselves into a much more global game and a much more global brand on a very expedited basis by going forth with some of these proposals.
100%. Rory and Tiger are going to get their money, and I'm sure the LIV is only going to do it if they have their own teams, but it's coming some way or another.
Somewhere or another.
I don't know how it's going to look. Cam, recommendations I think you had a good podcast in mind.
Yeah, I just said from an entertainment. I know Joel's got the information for you and making your brain bigger. I got one to turn your brain off and just enjoy and laugh. So, Smartless podcast. I'm probably slow to it. I think it's been around for a long time. That's Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett, 3, I guess, actor comedians. They had Tom Holland on this last week for about 45-minute interview, and I just thought it was really, really good. I thought it was obviously, with being actor to actors kind of thing, or people in the entertainment business, I feel like people are always have their guard down a little bit more, and so he seemed to me very genuine and off the cuff with his answers and kind of going into his passions and his life a little bit. And it was a funny interview, and he just seems like he's one of those, we talked about the Hollywood stars and how much that's changing. You know, like the top grossing stars, I think, are all over the age of 40 or something like that when we looked at that list, like looking at Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Mark Wahlberg, Tom Cruise, George Clooney, like all these people who have been stars for a long time continue to be the ones who are grossing the most, and that wasn't necessarily always the case. There was always like, oh, well, who's the up and comer? Who's the new actors? And I think he kind of falls into the up and comer list, and I think he could be someone who we're talking about or watching on screen for a long time. And he just seems like he's a kind of down to earth, regular dude for the most part. So that was a good podcast listen. I've listened to a few more of their episodes since that as well, and they're pretty entertaining. So that was my recommendation this week.
That's a good one. I'm definitely going to be listening to that.
Huge golf guy. Tom
huge
Holland.
golf guy. Huge golf and watch guy. He's right up my alley. He's it's hard not to like him, honestly. My recommendation for the week, I have quite a few, interestingly, but I'm going to stick to the 2. I've kind of fallen down this rabbit hole at night of micro cap investing. Ian Castle is phenomenal. I got a video of it's kind of a masterclass on how to find lightning in a bottle. Mostly just so I can get a feel for it. You know, when things start to get frothy, lots of people want to take extra risk, and they tend to go out on that curve, and microcaps tend to be where it's at. They see a stock go from 3 cents to 30 cents, and they're like, oh my God, I missed out on ultra wealth. But there's a lot of nuance to that, and how to kind of spot that. And Ian Castle, for all of those listening, is the king of microcaps. He has an amazing community online. Highly recommend. And then for those trying to live forever, Harvard biologist David Sinclair has a podcast on the world of DAS, and it's basically what it's going to take for you to live to 120. Dude's a genius. I really enjoy his stuff. He's kind of the other person I listen to who isn't Peter Attia. So really enjoy him. He's got that English accent that makes you believe everything he says.
Everything's 100% truth. Yeah, fact when someone speaks it with that accent.
100%. Yeah. So Cam, next Thursday-ish, maybe?
Let's do it. 4 for 4.